This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so yesterday we were talking about this particular release, right? We said, okay, fine, there is a SQL web application, and we kind of were releasing this particular, application out here. And what I did, or what we did rather, is that we declare a set of variables out here. We said resource group name is so and so. We said couple of variables, something like that. We basically declare them out. These are good to manage, meaning the declaration of these variables are good to manage. Now, let's say I have a different pipeline. I have a different release pipeline which is making use of the same variables, which is, let's say, making use of the same set of variables. So I have to again declare the same thing out here, right? I'll have to again declare the same thing out here because the variables that I declared on this particular pipeline are limited to the scope of this particular pipeline only. The variables that I declare here in, let's say, something known as a pipeline variable section are limited to the scope of this particular pipeline only. I cannot reuse them. But in the real-time environment, what you'll be having is not one or two release pipelines. You'll be having like hundreds of release pipelines out there. Each and everything having a repeatability of variables. Each and everything having, let's say, a repeatability of a lot of variables and parameters and etc. In that case, then how do you manage? So that is a very reason why you have something known as library or variable groups. What I do is like I'll say, okay, fine, I'll create a variable group and I'll say the name of the variable group is development. And I can start declaring variable names called, for example, environment prefix is development. ID something like ABC or something like this. And all the variables that you want to, let's say, declare to an environment like development, you can just say save, and you'll have a library called development. Now what you can do out here is that in your pipelines you can attach the library. How do you attach the library? So I'll come here and I'll say link variable group and I'll say this is development and I want this I want this library or I want this variable group to only be scoped to an environment like development. Say link. So now you're defining two things. You're defining a library with a couple of variables inside it and you're scoping it to a stage called development. You're scoping it to a stage called development. The thing here is like, isn't there a conflict now? You have an environment prefix here and you also have the same variable env prefix here, which is, let's say, scope to this particular development stage. Then if I create a release, then which variable is going to get resolved? If I, let's say, create a release, what is the variable which is going to get resolved out here? For which, let's create a release. In my release, I have like all these things out. I don't want anything. I'll just say disable everything out here and I'll just save. I'm not doing anything. I'm just going ahead and creating a release out here. So what's going to happen in this release is something like this. Even though this release doesn't have to do anything, this release really doesn't have any task to perform. Azure DevOps will firstly try to resolve all the variables that is there in the memory. Azure DevOps will try to do what? It'll try to understand what are the variables, it'll try to resolve the variables, and only then it'll actually go into the main task. So if you see here, it's saying a task called initialize job. Like once the task is started, it's saying something called as initialize jobs, and then it's downloading the artifact. So whatever was there in your drop location is being downloaded, and then that's it. It's finalized it because you do not have anything to do here. So you have like disabled everything out. So if you see initialize job out here, what Azure DevOps will try to do is that it will try to resolve all the variables that you have declared. every variable that you've declared, it'll try to resolve it. And if you say env prefix, do you see which value is getting resolved? This is the value that I declared on the pipeline. This is the value where I declared on the pipeline. And the value that I declared in the variable group isn't getting resolved, or it's not picking up the value that is declared in, let's say, the pipeline variable. Sorry, in, let's say, the variable group. This is called as order of precedence or order of priority, whatever you can call, it's okay. Meaning, if there are two same variables with the same name declared at the pipeline level and declared at the variable group level, Azure DevOps will always and always pick up something that is picked up or something that is defined at the release. Meaning, this is the value in my case. Now, if I want Azure DevOps to, let's say, pick this up, if I want to, let's say, Azure DevOps to pick up this particular value, can I change it to dev in this particular release? Can I edit and can I change the variable group out here? No, you cannot change the variable group out here. Variable group will get locked. After you create a release, the variable group will get locked. You can go to the variable group and change it. That's a different concept again. Here you can just say it is dev and just say save. Even if you save, it won't get reflected in this release. For this release, the state of the variable group has been logged. Meaning, if I want to do, let's say, if I want to change this particular variable, I can come to my pipeline and I can change it to, let's say, development. So I'm changing the same variable, but at a release level. I'm not changing it at a pipeline level. Meaning, even if you do an edit pipeline right now, this particular variable, right, it'll be environment prefixes dev only, because I have not changed it here. I have changed it on the pipeline level. I've changed it on the release level. Right now, if you look at the variables out here, the definition here is development out here. This is making a change at a pipeline level versus a release level. Meaning, if I now go ahead and deploy this out, it'll just do an initialize job. It'll try to resolve the variables. And now if I check what is the variable of, or what is, let's say, the value of environment prefix, it will come as development because it is picking the value from the pipeline variable. Now if I delete the pipeline variable, then it will start following on the variable group. Meaning, if you have two variables with the same name declared at the pipeline variable level and the global at, let's say, the library level, or also called as a global variable level, Azure DevOps is always and always going to pick up the pipeline variable. Let's say if there is environment prefix and then you have another variable called id which is not declared at, let's say, the pipeline level at all, then what's going to happen? It'll just go ahead to the variable group and it'll take out the id there. Meaning, Azure DevOps will try to resolve all the variables firstly. It will try to resolve everything that is stored in memory. These are called in-memory variables for the release. Whatever is there in the variable group, whatever is there in the library, it will set the order of precedence. And now if you look at the logs now, and now if you go to initialize job, you have the same variable called environment prefix. This is now being taken as development. This is now being taken what? As development out here. So every variable, everything basically that you basically define out here will be first resolved, and only after the resolution is when it will go ahead and create the release, or when it's going to go ahead and, let's say, do the release out here. Now this is a very commonly asked interview question, is that what is the order of precedence of Azure DevOps variable? I have a variable called a with a value b which is declared at the pipeline level. I have the same variable called a, which is with a value c, which is declared as a variable group. What do you
Kiran,
think will your release?
did you record the session?
Oh, did I record the session? Yeah, I did. I did. Sorry. Yeah, I did record the session. The session is being recorded. Thank you for reminding me, anyways. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry for that. So as I was saying, this is like a very popular interview question as to what is, let's say, the order of precedence. Like which variable do you think will Azure DevOps will try to resolve out? If you have two variables with the same name declared in such a way, what is, let's say, the order of precedence and etc. And this particular variable group, right? The advantage of this is that right now I have only scoped it to this particular release. Can I scope it to another release? Yes. I can say I have another release which is using the same set of variables. I can come here and say link this particular thing. Take development. Say link. This is called linking and delinking of variables or variable groups. Sorry. So you can go ahead, make sure that your variable group, let's say, is linked, and you can define the scope. You can change the scope also. Right now, this particular variable group is basically scope for the entire release. And my release only has one stage, so I can also go ahead and scope it to that particular stage. Meaning, in the earlier release that we had different set of variables, right? I mean, we have different set of stages, right? And each and every stage had a different set of, let's say, had a different variable out there. So like development, I can also go ahead and create another variable group called or other library called QA. Give an environment prefix here called QA and say save. And now I can use this particular variable group in here and scope it out to one particular stage, which is QA. This is how I can manage the life cycle of my variables. This is what I can do with variable groups as such, meaning they are portable in nature, meaning I can use them across the releases. Pipeline variables are limited only to this particular release. Whatever variable that you declare out here are only scoped or only can be used or can only be used for this particular release only. Variable groups can be linked to different releases. Is any questions here? Anything here?
But when we declare, it was taking only pipeline variables, right?
That's because you already have a variable on the pipeline. But what if you do not have a variable on the pipeline? Meaning in this particular release out here, I wanted to force and take, let's say, a variable from, let's say, environment prefix from coming from development in, I mean, coming from the library. So what if I edit this release and delete this variable? And now do a redeploy. Is it going to fail? No, it's not going to fail. It's going to basically now fall back on the variable group. So best practice is declare all the variables that are common in the variable group. Declare all the variables that are specific to a pipeline and the pipeline variables. So normally we have less pipeline variables. We have more of variable groups out there. Meaning what is really changing out here is just the environment prefix. The rest all can be declared the way they are. But if you are looking for a better management, please declare your all the variables, let's say, in the variable groups out here. Does it answer your question, Akila?
Yes.
Guys, any questions here? Anything?
Does variable groups accessible to the all the users in the project, or it's only user specific?
So it depends upon the access the particular user does have. Like if the user is like, let's say, an administrator access, meaning mostly variable groups and all these things are managed by the DevOps engineers. So developers and all, they should not be allowed to change it. They do not even know how to change it. So they will not have access. So what I'll do is like I'll have a group for all my DevOps engineers. I can create the group in Azure Active Directory and I can sync the group back into Azure DevOps and assign them the role of administrator on the project. So only they will be able to access that particular option called as a variable group.
Okay, these can be controlled by using IAM, right?
Not IAM, but here you have the access, right? In let's say this particular project, you have permissions and all. It can be controlled by this. For example, I am basically able to do all these things because I am in a group called administration. Like project administration is a group where I am a member of. This particular group has all the access. So these are all predefined groups. And that's the reason I'm added here. That's the reason I am able to basically do all that changes. If I'm not added here and if I'm added, let's say in just a reader or a contributor, like a reader or something somewhere like that, I'm not here. See, if I'm a reader, I'll I'll basically inherit all the policies or all the basically permissions that are assigned to a reader. So you can control it using this particular group out here. So IAM is like for the Azure portal, but this is again for Azure DevOps specific.
The,
Does
the
that answer
same
your
way
question?
apply for the same way apply for the all the pipelines, etc. In repos, etc.
Yes, yes. Everything this will get applied. Like throughout your project, this will get inherited. Because I don't want everyone or anyone to just come ahead and let's say change my pipelines or do all that stuff without having the knowledge about it. So that's the reason I'll have a specific group out here. I can also go ahead and create a new group out here. Create a specific group, assign specific permissions to that specific group and add members into it. I can do that also. Any more questions with this, guys? Anything more? Okay, now then, let's say in a real-time environment, you are given a task that you know that you basically want to go ahead and create a .NET project, and you'll need to do a CI/CD for that particular .NET project, and that CI/CD should go ahead and get deployed, let's say, on a Windows virtual machine, which is running an IIS server, or you can have let's say coming a requirement like what I am coming from a Python project or a Node.js or an npm whatever it is. The thing what happens out here is that we won't be able to discuss everything out here. That okay fine, this is an example for this, that's something that we won't be able to discuss. Then what is the best way to learn this? How is the best way in order to practice this? This is very very important. Very common question is that there are so many projects out here, then how do you learn it? How do you basically understand the creation of a pipeline, understand the creation of a CI/CD pipelines out here? Is that go to your Azure portal and you have something known as a DevOps Starter, a DevOps Starter kit. Here, let's say I want to go ahead and create a .NET project, which is let's say I want to go ahead and deploy it on a virtual machine. What I can do is I can say, okay, fine, create a new project. I can say create something new. And here it's asking you, firstly, setting up DevOps Starter with GitHub, change settings here or something like that. As you okay, fine, change it here, use Azure DevOps. Now it's telling you I have so many options out here. .NET, Node.js, PHP, Java, static website, Python, Ruby, Go, C Sharp, and you can also basically bring your own code if you have. But I'm looking for let's say .NET, and I'm looking for ASP.NET Core. You can also add a website here, and it'll say okay fine. Next, where do you want to deploy it out? Like I have so many things out here. I have a Kubernetes cluster that you can use. I have a Linux web app. I have a web app basically that is running from a container. I have a virtual machine. It's great. go ahead and create it. Now it'll say, okay, fine, what is the name of the project? I'll say this is a test project demo, something like this. Yeah, that's fine. This is like, I'll say this is test proj VM, and I'll say this is the organization that I have because it's automatically identified my organization. And I'll say this is the location of the virtual machine. Take it as ECS2 because that's a better reliability option out here. And you can also change the size here, like it is right now DS2v3. So DS2v3 good enough, but I'll just say DS1v2, or this is BS21. This is fine, like just to reduce the cost out here. This is a better option to go for. Just select, say review and create. I have to do nothing, guys. Now believe me, what will happen is this. Now let's go to my projects out here. Now I have a couple of projects here. This is a new project that I just created for just an explanation. But let's wait for this to complete. What's going to happen is that Azure is going to provision you everything. It's going to give you a repository. It's going to give you branches inside that repository. It's also going to give you some work items to play around with. It's also going to give you the ARM templates in order to create your virtual machine. It's also going to give you a release pipeline on how basically it gets, how basically creating the virtual machine and then deploying the code on top of the virtual machine and all that stuff. It'll give you everything at one go. So this will be like a one-stop solution for you all. That you can just come in, use something known as a DevOps Starter, provision projects, and then test it out and then clean up your projects. Like it's going to create everything out here. Now it's telling, okay, fine. Now see the service is called Azure DevOps Pipelines. It's also going ahead and creating the pipelines for you. It's also going ahead and doing what? It's creating the pipelines for you out here. Now it says, okay, fine. I've created everything out here. Now if you go to project home and kind of give a refresh out here. Now if you see, this is the project basically, which was practically not existent. And now you have a project here. Repositories, files. You have one branch out here, master. And you have application, which is the code. ARM templates to create a virtual machine. And add IIS extension into that virtual machine. This is everything what we have done, right? Now Azure DevOps is going to give you everything out there. And also pipelines. And it's also went ahead and triggered the pipeline. It's doing a build, see? It's copying ARM, publishing artifact, everything. Sorry. It also will basically go ahead and give you a CD pipeline also, a release pipeline also, which also got triggered. It just got triggered and it says, okay, fine, I have taken out an artifact, and see if you look at the steps out here, it's going ahead and creating it's going ahead and let's say creating, the resource, which is the virtual machine. And while creating it, it's telling, okay, fine, I'm adding the virtual machine to something known as a deployment group, which is this. Deployment groups is a concept, meaning here you can create multiple virtual machines, add multiple virtual machines here in something known as a deployment group, and then proceed with the code deployment on top of it. Unlike application services, unlike app services, virtual machines acts in a bit different way. You cannot basically directly deploy code on top of it. They will have to be a part of the deployment group. So it's also going ahead and adding the service as part of the deployment group, and then basically deploying the code out here. It's telling, okay, fine, create a website. It's doing an IIS website creation out here. It's telling, okay, fine, I'm just creating something known as an IIS, meaning the folders and everything. And then it's going ahead and deploying your application on top of it. So right now it's doing basically the ARM template deployment out here. And post that, it will go ahead and deploy or basically it will go ahead and deploy the code on top of that particular ARM template. So it's creating everything for you. See, it's also giving you a graphical UI telling that, what, this is what is happening right now. The release is happening, build is succeeded, all these things. And it will also go ahead and let's say create your resource groups and etc. Now this is, let's say, a research group that it created. This was a research group which is holding my DevOps Starter project, and this is, let's say, the research group basically, and it's creating multiple services out here. And the virtual machine hasn't been created. Yes, it will take some time for the ARM template to create the virtual machine. And see, it's right now creating the public IP, and it's doing all that stuff. So this is a one-stop solution. Let's say if you'd like to see how your project deployments actually work, or how do I need to configure a pipeline for this, or how do I need to, let's say, configure, let's say, a pipeline for, let's say, a project like Python. You do not know about it. We did not discuss about it in the class at all. How do you do it? You do not even have the code for it. Just come to Azure DevOps Starter or a DevOps Starter and then try this out. Like, this is one of the best resources that is available out there. Don't you think it is like very easy for you now to understand how your pipeline needs to be configured, how your projects need to be provisioned? Isn't it very, very easy? Isn't Microsoft making this very easy for you all? Now that's the reason a lot of people are actually going for, let's say, Microsoft products out there, because they are literally out of the box usage. Like, you do not have this kind of a support in Jenkins or in, let's say, Octopus or something like that. And even AWS doesn't provide you this kind of a support out here. But what Azure is doing is that, okay, fine, I have integrated something known as DevOps, so why not I give you all the pipelines? Meaning, this is something that you don't do in real time. Like, project creation is something you don't do it in real time. But for you to understand how to create something, this will really help you a lot. This will just really help you a lot. And you can also go ahead and create a new DevOps Starter project for, let's say, a different project like Python, adding a database into it. You can also check out how the CI/CD pipeline actually is working, according to which you can devise your strategy. So this is what we used to do when we were, or when basically I was basically when starting my career with Azure DevOps. We did not even have the DevOps Starter when I started, because Azure DevOps was like just a very nascent state. And later when they introduced it, it was a big relief for us to understand how to basically deploy things out there and all that stuff. And once this is done, right, you can also go ahead and it'll take some time for the virtual machine creation, because that is a VM. It'll of course take some time. And once the VM creation is done, it'll also go ahead and try deploying on top of that particular VM. Now it's saying, okay, fine, that's 4 minutes. Generally it takes about like 5 or 6 minutes out there for the virtual machine creation and etc. And then finally it's going ahead and creating the IIS website and deploying the website on top of the virtual machine that it's created. So it's giving you an entire package of things, and you can just basically go ahead and use the service, consume the service right away. And you can check how the CI/CD pipelines are actually working out here. Guys, any questions or just anything, any questions or anything that is needed out here?
So this is cannot be used in real-time environment, right?
Not really, because in real-time environment, right, you need to tailor your own, or you need to basically design your own strategies out here, because this particular strategy is very generic in nature. But in real-time environment, you might need to add something else. You might need to basically do something else and stuff. So what I'm suggesting is that don't use it in the real-time environment, but use it, let's say, in your Azure accounts. Even in the real-time environment, if you go, you'll still be having, let's say, your own Azure DevOps environment, right? So just in case if you get a requirement, then how do you see basically, or how do you test it out? There's nothing wrong in testing it out, right? Because let's say you have like till now learned about .NET, but all of a sudden they are now telling that, okay, fine, we are moving to Python. Can you please give me a CI/CD pipeline to it? Now you don't know what kind of a package manager Python uses, or what kind of a dependency restoration Python uses, how a build process happens for that. For that, you can just create a very sample project, see how it's like, kind of working out, and then implement the same strategy in the real-time environment.
Okay.
So this gives you an opportunity to understand, meaning you're not flying blind now. You at least know what is actually going in there. I mean, you at least know what is happening in there, and you would know, okay, how do I use it in there, and all that stuff. Okay, any questions? Any more questions that I can take here, guys?
And this will cover this DevOps starter will cover almost all every project, correct? Like
Yes, this will cover. Yeah, it has .NET framework, full framework, and core, C Sharp, Python, Ruby, PHP, Node, everything. Like you have literally everything out there, and also different kind of implementation strategies. Like let's say, do you want to implement it on a virtual machine, or a web application running on Windows, or a web application running on Linux, or let's say a web application running in a Kubernetes cluster. So it kind of covers all these things out. Now this will take some time to to get created and all that stuff. So it's okay. Let it be that way. So any more questions here, guys? Anything more here?
We created the virtual machine, right? Using the ARM
Mhm.
templates, everything. So we can use this process.
Yes, you can use this process. I mean, normally we use this process only. Like after the ARM template creation and etc., we basically go ahead. I mean, we use ARM templates only to create the virtual machine, etc. But the ARM template here, it'll be a bit complicated if you haven't practiced it. Like it's the same ARM template what we were using, let's say for our creation. Like you have a NIC card, you have let's say a public IP that is getting assigned, and finally NSGs and the virtual machine, and then the custom script extension. It's going ahead and installing the custom script and installing an IIS on top of the custom script and etc. Well, installing the IIS, it's doing a PowerShell.exe. So it's basically going ahead and doing the PowerShell.exe and invoking all these commands out here. So this is something that you'll just have to see and just have to follow this out. Like what is the syntaxing and all that stuff. So you can definitely use it out. You can definitely use it out as a example, but you'll have to tailor it, meaning you'll have to basically change it according to your own need. That would be a bit challenging part out there. Does that answer your question, Akila?
Yes.
Any questions more out here, guys? Anything on this one, on this particular concept? Okay, so let this get created. Let it run in the background. But one thing I wanted to cover out here is that the entire industry and also Microsoft is moving towards a concept called pipeline as a code. So we basically knew about what infrastructure as a code is, meaning can I maintain my entire infrastructure in the form of a code? Meaning, can I write my infrastructure as such? Can I basically go ahead and write my infrastructure? Can I basically go ahead and let's say maintain my infrastructure in the form of an ARM template, in the form of a PowerShell, in the form of a Terraform? Can I do that? Yes, of course, because that gives you a very great state to maintain and all that stuff. Now, moving forward, what is happening is that there is a concept known as pipeline as a code, where we are telling that can I maintain even my pipelines as a code, like not as a graphical editor out here, because this doesn't let me control, or this doesn't let me let's say do a version control of my pipeline. Can I maintain this as a code as such? Yes, definitely, and most of the people or most of the companies are moving towards that direction, and this is known as YAML pipelines. YAML. YAML. Yet another markup language. The full form of this is yet another markup language, which is called as pipeline as a code, and it has a syntax to follow. What I talk about it is that, for example, if I create a new pipeline, what we've been traditionally doing is that we said, okay, fine, go to classic editor and then create a pipeline for us, right? Now I won't do that. I'll say, okay, fine, Azure repos git, I'll select the source control and I'll just say this is test full framework. And now I'll say, okay, fine, this is a .NET ASP.NET project as such. And it's going to give me the pipeline. Now this is your entire CA pipeline. This is your entire pipeline as such. It's going to give you your pipeline in this methodology out here, where it's saying, if you look at things out, if you carefully observe this out, trigger meaning whenever your main branch is updated, please go ahead and trigger this pipeline out. Pool, nothing but which pool to use. If you want to use a private pool, then you can just say the name of the pool out here and give the name of the image. Here it's using an Azure hosted pool out here, which is telling here the image is Windows latest, whatever is the latest image out there that is available. In my case, it is 2019, so please give a 2019 server. Then variables out here.
Agent pool, right?
Yes, agent pool. Yes, pool is an agent pool. And then you have variables out here. Solution, like which solution do I need to target? In my repository, this is an ASP.NET full framework that I'm trying to target out here. So let's say, where is that? Yes, this one. And this is, let's say, the solution file out here, which is the full framework application. And this is the solution file that I want to target. So I can say it is not the generic, but I can say this is the solution file that I want to target out here. So whatever I am declaring in a classic editor, the same thing I am just declaring as a code out here. The same thing I'm just declaring as a code out here. And now you have different things like NuGet installer, which is a task. So if you observe, right, trigger is the parent and I'm saying this is the main. What if I want to even run this when the develop branch is also updated? Can go ahead and declare my triggers like this and also give a space out here. Now, when you are especially dealing with a YAML syntaxing, the spaces, the indentations are very, very, very important. Because if you don't give a proper space, it'll start throwing errors, telling what the syntax is not properly declared and all that stuff. Spaces and all these things are very important out here. And then you have variables, then you have steps out here. Now all your steps is nothing but the tasks, or basically when you look at, let's say, a classic pipeline out here. Let me come back to a classic pipeline. And let me see ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Full Framework Pipeline, and let me edit this out. So this is the step, or this is the job under which you have different tasks, right? Same way, this is the job under which you have different tasks. All these are tasks out here. So you have NuGet installer, NuGet restorer, and it's saying restore the dollar solution. Dollar solution is declared here, which is the solution file. Then it's saying build the solution. What is the solution? And it's giving some arguments out here. Same thing it gave here, right? Just took the entire thing and just saying like this. And finally it's telling, okay, find tasks. VS test is something like this. And you would also like to go ahead and, let's say, publish the artifact, right? How do I add that? Publish build artifact. I'll say yes, this is the location that I want to add, and I added a new task out here. Now this is giving me a complete pipeline, but I can version control this pipeline, meaning like any code in my pipeline right now, I can go ahead sorry, I can go ahead and version control this out. And if I save and run, it says yes, I want to do directly a commit on here. It will go ahead, create a pipeline for me. Same tasks, everything is the same, but your editor now becomes, or let's say the way you write this pipeline becomes different. The way you now are writing the pipeline is in the form of a YAML code. in the form of something known as a YAML editor. This is the trend today. This is, let's say, what is right now running in the industry today. Like most of the projects are getting migrated from the classic to YAML, because once you start working with it, it's like very, very easy to work around with. You can version control your entire pipeline. And as in when you save this, right? If you look at your main branch now, you will have this something known as an Azure pipeline that will get it saved. Use YAML 1, YAML 2 and all that stuff, because I've like created so many. And this is just now, right? So just like your code, you can save this out. You can version control it. And it is easily portable. If you are going to a different project, and if you want to use the same thing, if you want to use the same definition, you do not have to again create something from the scratch. You can start, or you can just copy this entire thing and start creating a new pipeline. That's it. And that's how easy it is to maintain YAML. And I am not really sure about YAML. I am like, used to only the classic way of editing, because even me found it a bit difficult to move to YAML initially, because I basically come from a classic background, because I've been here, let's say, since a long time. I know basically how the pipeline works and all that stuff. For example, something like web application SQL server. This is something that we created, let's say, in classic, right? We have like defined the entire pipeline in classic, and you only know how to define this in classic. Then what is the workaround right now? Workaround is very simple. Do all the changes, create in classic, not a problem. Do every change out here, not a problem. After you create it, click here, say export to YAML. You will have a YAML file that is getting created for you. You do not have to do even anything out here. You can open this YAML file in an editor like VS Code. Oh, yeah. Open with, and I can say in an editor like VS Code. And you'll have the entire pipeline out here. You will have your entire definition that got out here. So everything that you were doing in a classic can now be converted into YAML. And you can start saving this out, and you can start using these applications, and you can just basically, this is just a vanilla definition out here. Just take this pipeline out, you can start working with this. The main challenge with YAML is not writing it, but to understand where you're giving the space, where you're giving the spaces and all. That actually matters a lot. So for that, you need a lot of practice, guys. You'll need, let's say, a lot of practice out here in order to understand how to create YAML and etc. Now, if I'm not wrong, like the release what we created out here, right, using a demo generator, even Azure might have used something like a YAML pipeline, if I'm not wrong, because they are, everyone is like moving towards YAML, so they want to use it in a YAML pipeline mode. So if I'm not wrong, they must have used it in a YAML. Okay, strange, they used a classic editor. Okay, fine, but still. Right now, if you look at, let's say, the Microsoft documentations and etc., most of the documentations are now being shifted to YAML. Like, how do you write YAML? And how do you basically build out YAML and etc. And it's not tough. It's actually more easier. Just define your pipeline, export your pipeline to YAML. You'll have the entire YAML definition with you. You can start editing out that one, and then you can start creating new pipelines using that particular YAML file. For example, let's say if I want to create the same pipeline, this is what I was talking about, right? Let's say I want to create the same pipeline out here. I don't have to follow so many steps. I'm just taking this particular file called as a YAML file. I'll go to the new project that we created, which is like I think this one. Yes, this one. I'll go into the repository of this particular pipeline, and there's a branch called master branch, and I'll say, okay, fine, there is a new file that I want to add, which is application pipeline. Okay, pipeline dot YML, YAML syntax, and I just copy everything out here. I'll say commit, say create, commit this out, and I can now go ahead and create a new pipeline. Like this is a CI basically that got triggered because you had a continuous integration, but I can just cancel this out. I don't want this to get triggered. Fine. Say new pipeline. Say Azure repos git test project or something like this. And instead of now creating a new pipeline, I'll say existing Azure pipelines YAML file. It says, okay, fine, this is the branch. And I see there's a YAML file, YML. Say continue. Isn't this easy for me to now port my pipelines? Meaning, if I just create one definition and give it as a sample, I can start building my pipelines from this particular definition only. All you need to now change is, let's say, the path to the solution file. That's it. Your job is done. Isn't it that simple? Isn't it that easy right now? It is, right? But you need to just have a practice on it, understand where the spacing is coming. And this is something that really cannot be taught, guys. This is something that can only be practiced because there's a syntax out here. And if you follow the syntax carefully, it's like the task, which is a parent, then you have a space out here and then inputs, then another space out here and then these things out here. And you can edit your YAML pipelines right away. You can show assistant, you can add tasks here, and all the tasks will be coming as a YAML format out here. So it is like this particular process out here, which is like, which the industry is, let's say, moving towards, which is the YAML side of things out. And this is how you can create YAML pipelines. This is how you can save YAML files and etc. Guys, is there any questions out here? Anything that I can take? Now this reads a lot of practice. This requires a lot of practice, and I would suggest you all to start writing YAML because that's when you'll understand what is the complexity of it. As and when you start writing YAML, you'll basically know what are the errors basically that you kind of get, and what is, let's say, the technicality involved in that. Guys, is this okay? Any questions here? Anything here?
In which situations we will use YAML?
It's not like which situations, rather it's like, do you want to use YAML or do you want to use classic editor? Like it's just YAML versus classic editor as of now. Wherever you are using classic editor, it can be replaced with YAML. The only disadvantage of YAML right now is that it's not supporting all the tasks like classic does. It's not supporting everything what classic does. Like variable groups and etc. cannot be used in YAML. Task groups and etc. has a limited basically has a limitation with YAML. So it depends upon again the project that you're going into. That do you want to use a YAML pipeline or do you want to use a classic editor? How do you want to actually approach this out? And what is the general consensus with the team, that do they want to also maintain the pipeline, or do they also want to version control the pipeline? What is it exactly that they want to achieve out of it, and all that stuff. So it depends. Again, it's not about which scenario. In every scenario you can basically implement YAML, but it just depends upon what you want to achieve. Whether you want to, let's say, achieve a complete pipeline as a code, or let's say go with a classic flow. So anything that gets your job done is good enough. Anything like that is like good enough for me. Does that answer your question, Akila?
Yes.
And between when we were talking about YAML, the release the release also got completed and all. So it went ahead, created the virtual machines and all. And if you look at that particular resource group, you would have a virtual machine and a public IP attached to it. Like this is a test project VM. You also have a DNS name label attached to it, using which you can browse this particular website. Now it says, okay, fine, this is success and all, right? So this is a website that is running on the Azure virtual machine, which is basically hosted out of an IIS server. So you haven't done anything as such. You just use an Azure DevOps generator out here and just went in and provisioned all this project. You provision the complete project out here. Like it provisioned all the resources, it did everything for you. You didn't even have to do anything out here. So this is a combination of things that I wanted to explain out here. And I wanted to cover what is YAML. Like this is something that you'll need to practice out from now. So please practice this out and please start using YAML pipelines from now. Just try to see and try to convert your existing pipelines to YAML. And I'm only able to read YAML here because I have an extension to YAML. So you will have to just install something known as YAML extension out here. Like any YAML extension is good enough. There are a lot of YAML extensions. Like one basically that is I'm using a YAML extension called it's supported by Red Hat. You can also have a YAML, docs -YAML, which is supported by Microsoft, which is like even more better. You can also install these extensions out here, which is going to give you a very useful understanding on how you basically create the YAML and all that stuff. So you can do that as well, and you can format this document and all that stuff in order to basically give you a pure view of YAML and all that stuff. So you can kind of create YAML pipelines and you can export the YAML pipelines firstly. So just try exporting your classic pipelines to YAML and see how you can kind of work with that. And that will kind of give you a starting point towards YAML.
Why is showing
Guys,
me
any
YAML?
hmm? Sorry,
So
I
there are
didn't get you.
three
I'm
files.
sorry.
There are three files in YAML, right? So in that window, so we
Yes,
have
yes,
created
they
one
are.
project.
Your voice is breaking, Chandra. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Yeah, 1 second. So here we have three files, YAML files. So
Mm-hmm.
what are those? Those are the versions or
No, no, they are files that I created earlier. Like this was created on
oh,
Monday. See, this was created today. Like I
oh,
was just testing something out and I created YAML files for it. So these two were created on Monday and this is like 12 minutes ago right now today. So just different files that I was like kind of playing around with.
so
Okay, so am I good?
how does the
Hmm?
YAML control the version?
Sorry.
I
So
mean, how does YAML control the version?
like this, just like a file, like a README file that you edit, right? Even you can basically see if this is a README file out here. I have multiple versions for it, right? I have like multiple comments. I have multiple things out here for this. In the same way, you can now raise PR against your YAML file. And if you don't like that, you can revert that PR back. If you don't like that change, you can revert that out. That is something that Classic doesn't give you an option to do. This version controlling is something Classic doesn't give you an option to do. But now, like any other file in your repository, you can commit, you can make commits to your YAML file. You can do multiple things to your YAML file out here. And everything is like version control. For example, if I do something like this, if I add a comment out here in my YAML telling that this is a sample commit, even this gets tracked now.
Oh,
Like even this gets tracked. Even this should come ideally from a PR. Like your main branch should be protected, and this should ideally come from a PR. So all these gets tracked out here. This is something that you cannot do with, let's say, the Classic. This is what version controlling really means for me. Meaning, what kind of changes am I making to, let's say, my pipeline? How am I making changes to my pipeline? And as and when I made this change, right, it kind of triggered the YAML pipeline because I said that the trigger is main. And if you, let's say, are facing a bit of challenges, let's say with that particular trigger and etc., you're not able to understand this out, you can also do this. You can write it, you can version control it in YAML, but you can control your triggers in a Classic. Like I'll say triggers, and as and when it hit triggers, right, it'll give you a Classic view of the pipeline. That what exactly is happening out here. And I can say override YAML, and I can now give my own triggers out here. So isn't this the classic way of doing things? It is, right? You can also schedule your pipelines and all that stuff. So this has both. It's like a hybrid model. It has both capabilities out here. It has, let's say, a classic way to do things, and it has also the YAML way to do things and all. So if you're not getting something like, okay, fine, how do I kind of do this, or how do I basically that I can save this and all that stuff, you can basically use this particular thing and kind of control your pipelines also. This is what YAML really gives you a capability to do. And main thing is version controlling. Like how do you version control YAML is like this. Like every commit that I do is getting tracked out here. Every commit that I do is getting tracked. Everything is getting associated with the work item. Like this is something that I wasn't able to do in Classic. In Classic, if I do a change, I just need to see the history and I don't know why I made that change, right? I don't know why someone made that change. In YAML, you can associate it with the work item. So now even DevOps engineers can now make full use of, let's say, Azure DevOps. Because earlier to which we were doing pipelines, we were doing releases and all that stuff. Now the thing is that you can also go ahead and, let's say, version control your pipelines and do all that stuff also. So this is what the advantage actually, you kind of get while going for a YAML. Does that answer your question, Chandra?
Yes.
Okay, also I'll just delete this particular resource group so that I don't burn a lot of money out here. See, create. Delete, and I'll say delete this out too. So make sure that you delete all these things because virtual machine costs you, a good amount of money. So make sure you delete all your resource groups. Even if it's a free trail account, please make it a habit to go ahead and delete all these things out. Because when you switch over to, let's say, some point or the other, you basically would kind of switch out to a pay as you go, because there are limited amount of credit cards out here, and you cannot basically go ahead and ask everyone for their credit card and kind of create a free trail account out of that. So please make it a habit to basically go ahead and clean up your resources as and when you create it out. I make sure to do that, like as and when I basically create a couple of projects out here which I don't need at all, which kind of confuse me out. I'll also go ahead and delete these projects out. So I'll go to the organization settings project and then kind of delete these out. But please make sure that you're deleting the right project. So this is how you can delete things out here. So any questions with this, guys? Anything that I can take?
So now we are build the virtual machine, added IIS role, and we pushed some time code.
Yes.
So after some time, we got a new code to push to those same environment. That the procedure will be same, correct? We need to create build
Yes.
pipeline and release pipeline.
Yes, and do a continuous integration and continuous deployment. Whenever the developer will check in the code, your code will get built and kind of take it to the virtual machine out there.
Okay, but we earlier we did on web app. Now we are dealing with the VM with IIS. So
Yes,
what will
exactly.
be the difference? What will be
Nothing.
the difference on pipeline?
Nothing. It's just going to be the same. Like the way we have created it, the way that we have created it using the Azure Starter, you got, like, say, the entire definition, right? You had a release definition out there. I unnecessarily deleted the project. Let me see if there is a way to recover this out. And this is the project. Restore project. So nothing, but the release pipeline is going to look a bit different. This is your release definition now. Earlier what we did is, like, we created ARM templates and we deployed the code on top of, let's say, an Azure web app. And now you are just deploying the code on top of a virtual machine. That's it. So it's not going to be anything different. The same CI, the same CD concepts gets applied here. It has a continuous deployment trigger out here. I'll just disable that. Everything remains the same. As and when the developer just goes ahead and commits into the file out here, into, let's say, if he changes the application file out here, it will go ahead and trigger the pipeline, do a CI, and after the CI is run, it will go ahead and do a CD. So nothing is going to change, Chandra. The only thing that is like changing out here is the procedure what you're following. You're doing like two different agent jobs now, and you're running these jobs on a deployment group. And you just implemented a concept known as deployment group out here. That's it. That's the only thing that you went ahead and changed it out. And also discuss about what deployment groups are in much detail when the time comes. I'll discuss what deployment groups really are. But just to give you an idea, a deployment group is just to take the code and deploy it on a virtual machine. You don't need a deployment group for a web application, whereas you'll need a deployment group for a virtual machine as such. So does that answer your question, Chandra?
Yeah.
So leverage this out. Like this is a very good option out here that is available by Azure, which is a DevOps Starter. So leverage this out and see, how you can make use of this particular thing, how you can basically make use of it out. And especially when you come from, let's say, a pay-as-you-go subscription, please make sure to control the cost. Please make sure to, let's say, delete all your resources as and when possible. So any more questions out here, guys? Anything more?
But in the Azure DevOps, we don't have any credits, right?
No, in Azure DevOps you don't. So you can have like multiple projects out here. You can have like n number of projects. No, not an issue at all. You will not even, basically this will not cost you anything. But when you create something on the Azure portal, that's when it will cost you.
Yeah, yes.
But in Azure DevOps, what really happens is that we had given a parallelism request, right? We said Azure to go ahead and help us out with the agents. So it gave you an agent. That agent will have a time. For me, it gave me somewhere around 1800 minutes. For everyone, it will be the same thing. And I have currently consumed 104 minutes out of the 1800 minutes out there. If it's 1800 out of 1800, then I won't be able to use the Azure hosted agent now. I'll have to purchase it. And it's very costly to purchase. Like one agent, if you want to purchase, right, it'll be somewhere around 2000 rupees per month. So that's the reason I kind of use it. I kind of use my own self-hosted agent. And again, the question is, if you want to basically go ahead as self-hosted agent, then you'll have to create a virtual machine and convert it into a self-hosted agent, right? Yes. But instead of that, I converted my own local machine into a self-hosted agent. And my local machine is now hosting all my agents out here. Like if you look at my particular repository, which is on, or basically my particular drive, which is H drive, it has all these agents and everything, the work folder and all that stuff. And I have a couple of runs also in the work folder. Like I did a couple of artifacts and all that stuff. So you can leverage this functionality also. So in that way you can avoid a lot of cost. So yes, Azure DevOps doesn't really charge you anything, but the services are expendable in nature. They are limited in nature. So right now I'm at like 104. I can at max go for, let's say, 1800 minutes out there. 1800 minutes, yes, it's a lot. But with the amount of demos that I give, this is actually not sufficient for me. So that's how, or it entirely boils down to what you're using out here. Does it answer your question, Akila?
Yeah, yes.
Any more questions, guys? Anything more on this? So this covers like 80% of what Azure DevOps is. I wouldn't say 100, because Azure DevOps is actually a lot vast than what we see. That remaining 20% only comes from purely practice. This covers like most of the solid concepts what you generally use on Azure DevOps on a daily basis. With that, from tomorrow, what we're going to do is like we're going to move towards the open source side of things, and we are going to start with Terraform. We'll see what is Terraform, how do you create Terraform templates and etc. And then come back to Azure DevOps and see how do you implement Terraform using Azure DevOps. And then we are going to discuss about Jenkins, And then we are going to see how can you integrate Jenkins with a service like Azure DevOps. Octopus, and then how can you implement a service like, how can you implement a service like Octopus with Azure DevOps? And finally, Dockers and Kubernetes. And how do you leverage Azure DevOps for the same? So everything we are talking about, the central piece of it remains Azure DevOps. So Terraform, we will discuss about Azure DevOps. And like Octopus, we discuss about Azure DevOps. And Azure DevOps has a great feature called Azure DevOps Labs. This is something you might have kind of read, or just something basically that you might have read. Something that you might have seen, looked at, which is one of the very awesome features out here to give you a hands-on practice. For example, you don't know how to configure a YAML pipeline. You can come here, you can click on this lab, and it will very detailedly explain how do you configure a YAML pipeline. It will give you step by step everything. It's just going to give you everything out here. It's just going to teach you how to create all these things out, and it's just going to give you like a complete Bible out here. Like this is going to give you a complete end-to-end mechanism out here, and you have a lot of things out here like automating your infrastructure with Terraform. How do you integrate Terraform with Azure DevOps? In this lab we cover this one and all that stuff. So it's telling you how do you implement Terraform out here, how do you deploy code on top of it, and etc. So it's going to give you even the code. Even the code base is actually given by Azure. All you need to do is, like, let's say you have something known as provision out here. It says what, getting started, use Azure DevOps demo generator, and you can generate the project. You can say sign in and you can generate the project out here. So you can also provision the entire project out here as well. So this gives you, these are like the tools basically, or these are, let's say, the weapons that you can use in order to learn Azure DevOps. And Azure DevOps has got, let's say, a great support. Like I've never seen a product with this kind of a support out here. Like it's giving you a lot of support out here. Like any product you name it, you get it. Either in Azure DevOps Labs or in a demo generator, you get this out. It'll explain everything, with in a very crisp manner. Like what are this, and every service is actually explained in very, very, very crisp manner out here. If you see this, you have boards, you have repos, you have CI, you have CD, and you have like external things like, let's say, Octopus, Kubernetes, everything you have. Like you have all these things also, all these features also. So how do you invoke a key vault? For example, we were talking about a key vault the other day, right? You can say using key vault in your pipeline, and see how it, like, kind of gives you all these things out. It's saying create a key vault out here, and then use a pipeline, and then say invoke something known as a key vault out here in this particular template. So it gives you a lot of features, guys, and please look at these links out. Check these links out. This is Azure DevOps Labs, and they also have a YouTube channel out there. This is called Azure DevOps Labs. They also have a YouTube channel which is called Azure DevOps Labs. You can also basically look into that particular channel out here. I think it's called DevOps Labs. So sorry, I put my organization, Azure DevOps Labs. See, they also have a YouTube channel out here telling you what needs to be done and all that stuff, which has a lot of clear lists and everything. The kind of people coming in, telling you how do you deal with containers, how do you deal with everything and all that stuff. So you have a lot of things out here that you can actually explore. But the thing is, you need to understand where to start out. So I would say Azure DevOps Labs is the best place to start out. Combine this with Azure DevOps Starter that is there in the Azure portal. Both of them kind of gives you a lot of ability out there. Any questions with this approach, guys? Anything? Any questions, guys? Anything as such? Anything with the coverage, with anything with the interviews, anything that you can ask before we close the session for today?
But we didn't discuss about test plans. I didn't see.
Test plans is something that we do not implement at all. Test plans is something that the QAs will basically implement this out. They'll basically run a couple of test cases and all that stuff. That is something which is heavily oriented towards a quality analyst a role of a quality analyst. So I have explained, I have made sure to encompass everything that a role of a DevOps engineer plays, which is primarily pipelines and understanding of what boards are and all that stuff. So that's the reason I have not covered that particular concept up there.
Okay. And at last we have artifacts, right? So when we ran the pipeline, we got the artifacts, right? So both are same.
Now, that is a bit different thing. I will explain it, when we are doing Dockers and Kubernetes. That's where I can, kind of explain that out. So instead of relying upon an external feed, these are called feeds and artifacts and all that stuff. So instead of relying upon external dependencies, meaning NuGet and all that stuff, instead of relying upon external dependencies, what developers do is they upload their own packages there and kind of use it on the pipeline. So that's again heavily used by developers. Like we do not, or rather, we do not create something in the artifact and we do not upload some dependencies and all that stuff. But yes, you can store your artifacts there, whatever artifacts that you're kind of generating. You can store your artifacts in there. But I'll also cover what artifacts are. But when we are kind of discussing upon Docker, that will help me out to cover, let's say, the artifacts also. And you can go ahead and give it a read. Even here you have a couple of labs out here on artifacts and all, test plans and all these things. You can go ahead and give it a read out here also. It's called package management to the artifact and all that stuff. But it doesn't make a lot of sense here because these are all feeds and all this stuff and all. Because see, that's what it looks like. This is a heavy development area. Like you need to understand what feeds are and all that stuff, and you kind of they upload all these feeds out there so that they can use this out, let's say, in the projects. So not something that we do a lot. This is all, let's say, developers what they do, and they kind of upload it out there into, let's say, Azure artifacts and kind of use it in the pipeline. This is something that we don't do a lot out here. So whatever I had to cover is that from a DevOps engineering perspective, I wanted to make sure that we cover everything out. From a developer's perspective, it won't be what do you say? It won't justify the need out here to cover even from a developer's perspective because I myself am not a developer, so I won't be able to give you that depth of understanding on why or how basically the feeds are version controlled and all that stuff. Does that answer your question, Akila?
Yes. Thank you.
Anything else, guys?
Hi, Kiran. You told that Azure DevOps parallelism request to fill the form, right? So where we can use?
Okay, so you are using the hosted agent, right? The Azure DevOps hosted agent. So you're only able to use the hosted agent because you have filled the parallelism request. So if you did not fill the parallelism request, right, the number of parallel jobs would be 0, and you cannot basically even use a hosted agent. So that is where that request is coming into picture. Does that answer your question, Kiran?
Yeah, that's it.
Where can we find that link?
So I usually kind of go like this. Like my best place is like come here into the organization settings, or directly Google it Azure DevOps parallelism request and etc. But the best place is like come here, parallel jobs, and inside parallel jobs, you'll say this button, learn more. This will directly take you to the documentation of what parallel jobs is and all that stuff. And here you have just a form to submit. So you can either save this particular link, it will be the same form, or you can do the documentation. But I generally come from here because I want to make sure that I am clicking on the right link and etc.
Okay.
Whenever we create the new
Hmm?
organization, we need to fill the form, right? Or else.
Yes. Whenever you create a new organization, you will have 0 parallel jobs out there. But the suggestion that I would give is that whenever you create a new organization, right, use a new email ID. Like don't create a new don't create an organization with the same email ID. They won't allocate the parallel job to you. So please create a new organization with a new email ID and then raise a request with that particular email ID. If possible, a different name, so that the parallelism request gets allocated to you. Okay. Anything else, guys? So there are no further questions, then I'm good to close the session, and we can meet tomorrow and we can start with Terraforms as such.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Have a
Thank
great day ahead. Thank you.